Here are 15 things you didn't know about the great Malcolm X. We bet you've never heard at least 3 of these facts about one of the most influential men of the last century. Make sure you hit that subscribe and like button. 15. Middle school dropout. The American education system has historically always been a point of contention with the black community. So much so that some of our greatest figures never received a high school diploma. Some even never finished middle school. Malcolm Little was born in Omaha, Nebraska, but spent the latter half of his school years in Lansing, Michigan. The middle child of 7 kids, young Malcolm excelled in school. He would often earn the highest honors and was considered one of the best and brightest in his classes. Young Malcolm even enjoyed going to school and had dreams of one day becoming a lawyer. However, things soured once he expressed his lifelong goals with his 8th grade teacher. According to his autobiography, Malcolm told his teacher his ambitions about one day trying cases as a lawyer. His teacher replied, "That was no realistic goal for someone of his race." Young Malcolm was devastated and eventually became disenchanted with school, leading him to drop out at the age of 14, move to Boston with his sister, and enter the workforce. Encounters like this with white society hardened Malcolm's beliefs that the white world offered no place for a career-oriented black man, regardless of talent. 14. Exceptional parents. Malcolm was definitely a chip off the old block. His oratory skills, leadership qualities, and thirst for knowledge were not random qualities, but rather genetic traits. Both of Malcolm's parents were exceptional. Malcolm's mother, Louise Helen Little, was born in Grenada, the granddaughter of slaves and the daughter of a non-consensual relationship between her mother and a white man. Louise became a fierce woman. She was fluent in several languages, French, English, and Creole. After immigrating from Grenada to Montreal, she was introduced to Garveyism and the United Negro Improvement Association. Garveyism is an aspect of black nationalism that refers to the economic, racial, and political policies of UNIA founder Marcus Garvey. As part of the UNIA, Louise was a secretary and reporter for her local chapter. Here is where she also met Malcolm's father, Earl Little. Earl Little was born on July 29, 1890, in Reynolds, Georgia. Earl developed a hatred of white people, as 4 of his brothers were murdered by white men, with one being lynched. He met Louise during their time at the UNIA chapter in Montreal, Canada. She was his second wife, and altogether, he fathered 10 children, 7 with Louise. Earl was a powerful pastor who raised his children under the Baptist faith and preached self-reliance and self-pride. As a leader at the church and the UNIA, he became a local outspoken advocate within the community. He would give speeches not only in church, but also at assembly halls and on street corners. Earl's oratorical powers inspired the black community and set fear into local races, so much so that he and his family were forced to relocate a couple of times in the face of violent retributions by the white terrorist organizations Ku Klux Klan and the Black Legion. Unfortunately, Earl Little also met a violent ending. By several accounts, Earl was beaten and left to be struck by a shadow. She was institutionalized and remained committed for almost 30 years. 13. Papa X. He was known by many names, but he loved being called Daddy. In 1955, Malcolm met Betty Sanders during one of his lectures. In 1956, Betty joined the Nation of Islam and changed her name to Betty X. After several years of courtship, in 1958, Malcolm proposed to Betty during a telephone call. They married 2 days later. Together, they had 6 daughters: Atala, Kabila, Ilyasa, Gamila Lumumba, and twins Malika and Malak. All of his daughters were named after powerful people, including Atala, who was named after Attila the Hun, and Gamila, who was named after Patricia Lumumba. Malcolm spent a lot of time advocating for self-reliance and preaching the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the tenets of Islam, but he loved being at home with his girls. He would often take them to the beach while he would write his speeches. At home, he would read poetry and advocate for Betty to let him cook, for which, according to his widow, he never not once cooked. It was hard for his critics to imagine Malcolm as a doting family man. Even his supporters tried to suppress that image of him in fear that it would weaken his fight. On the contrary, Malcolm's advocacy included strong family values and keeping the family as a foundation of a strong society. Tragically, their last image of their father was complete brutality. In front of 4 of his daughters, Malcolm was gunned down while giving his final speech. 12. Frenemies. Did you know that Malcolm X was almost murdered by someone he considered a friend? Before Malcolm Little became Malcolm X, he was known in the streets as Detroit Red, or simply Red. After dropping out of school, Malcolm bounced from living in Boston with his sister to eventually settling in Harlem, New York. He worked odd jobs like shoe shiner and waiter for the New Haven Railroad. While working as a dishwasher, he ran across an aspiring comedian named John Sanford. Both men had naturally red hair, so Sanford, being from Chicago, started to adopt the moniker Chicago Red, while Malcolm became known as Detroit Red. On the streets of Harlem during the 1940s, Detroit Red was engaged in pimping, racketeering, burglary, drug dealing, and gambling. His involvement with the underworld caused him to cross paths with one of his biggest players at the time, West Indian Archie. West Indian Archie controlled the numbers game in Harlem, but wasn't your run-of-the-mill street criminal. West Indian Archie had this amazing ability to memorize numbers and sequences, a skill set that Malcolm believed would have made Archie a scientist, physicist, or astronaut, if not for the lack of opportunities black people were presented with at that time. Archie took a liking to Red and showed him the ins and outs of the numbers game. However, things soured because of a bet gone awry. Red claimed he placed a bet with Archie that netted him $300, but Archie didn't recall Red placing such a bet. Because of Archie's reputation of being a human computer that doesn't need to write down his bets, if a claim that he forgot a bet was to get out, his business and reputation would suffer. So after paying out Red's winnings, West Indian Archie later believes Red was lying and orders him to repay his claimed earnings. After missing his imposed deadline, Archie intends on reclaiming his money and unaliving Detroit Red in the process. Archie tracked down Red, and as he pursued, shots were fired toward Red. Archie missed, and the rest is history. 11. World War II veteran. Almost. Sergeant First Class Malcolm Little? Maybe in a different timeline, but did you know he was actually drafted for service during World War II? When Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, it kicked off the Second World War. The U.S. was hesitant to enter the war, but to prepare, they began drafting able-bodied young men in October of 1940. One of those men summoned to the draft abroad was Malcolm Little. Still in his late teens, Malcolm was just the right age to join Uncle Sam's military. The 6'4" young man out of Nebraska was surely fit enough to pass the physical requirements, but also slick enough to find a way out. To get drafted, you must not only be of sound body, but of sound mind. When Malcolm was psychiatrically evaluated, he went full-on crazy. During his evaluation, Malcolm said, "I want to be down south, organize some black soldiers, steal us some guns and kill us some white folk." Acts like that, combined with his mother already being institutionalized, Malcolm was declared mentally disqualified for service. With that, Malcolm avoided taking part in the war. 10. He grew up Christian. Malcolm was one of the first men to rise in prominence in America and openly declare his devotion to Islam. But did you know he was actually raised Christian? Growing up in the Midwest, Malcolm and his siblings were all baptized. As a Baptist preacher, Malcolm's father, Earl, guided his children through the teachings of Christ. He taught his children the ways of self-reliance and self-determination through Bible scriptures. Even after the death of his father, Malcolm saw the kindness in Christianity through the acts of Seventh-day Adventists. In his autobiography, Malcolm said about the Adventists, "They are the friendliest white folk I have ever seen." Of course, he would go on to feel much different about Christianity, and it had a lot to do with this next fact. 9. His siblings introduced him to the Nation of Islam. In the 1992 biopic by Spike Lee, it is portrayed that Malcolm's turnaround in prison is guided by a man named Bain. It also alludes to the idea that Bain encourages Malcolm to turn away from perming his hair, using drugs, and lean into self-education. It is also depicted that Bain introduced Malcolm to Islam and the Nation of Islam. All of this did happen while Malcolm was in prison, but it wasn't spearheaded by his mentor Bain. Because there was no Bain, the character featured in the film was a creative choice made by film director Spike Lee. Malcolm's turnaround in prison was a combination of factors, but for certain, his introduction to Islam and the NOI was because of his siblings. After being sentenced to 8 to 10 years for the crimes of larceny and breaking and entering, Malcolm's siblings would write him letters espousing this new religious movement led by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This movement was all about black self-reliance and advocated for blacks to return to Africa, all guided by the religion of Islam. This movement was called the Nation of Islam. At first, Malcolm was reluctant at the letter's insistence until 1948 when his brother, Reginald, wrote to him, asking him to give up eating pork and smoking cigarettes. He did both. An imprisoned Malcolm had already become disenchanted with Christianity, and as time went on, he became more receptive to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and committed himself to the Nation of Islam. 8. America's Most Wanted. During his Detroit Red days, Malcolm was a terror in the streets. He sold and used various drugs, was a womanizer, gambler, and known to be very violent. Even after all of this, he was still considered no more than a petty criminal that should be taken off the streets. But did you know that before he became Malcolm X, he was already on the FBI's watch list? During Malcolm's transition from crook to revolutionary, he was challenged to reflect on his relationship with white people by his brother, Reginald. As he reflected, Malcolm had concluded that all of his engagements with white folk up until that point were marked by dishonesty, injustice, greed, and hatred. As he continued his self-education of American politics and its systems of oppression, Malcolm became inspired to create change. In 1950, now anointed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as Malcolm X, he wrote a letter to President Harry Truman. In the letter, Malcolm expressed his opposition to the Korean War and declared himself a communist. That letter landed Malcolm on the FBI's watch list from then until his death. You're never going to believe these next few facts about Malcolm X. 7. He helped grow the NOI by 10,000%. After Malcolm was released from prison, he left his life of crime, swine, and drugs behind. After he was granted parole in 1952, Malcolm visited Elijah Muhammad in Chicago. A short time later, he was named minister of a temple in Detroit. Shortly after that, he was appointed to Boston, then Philadelphia, and finally, Temple No. 7 in Harlem. During his run as minister for the NOI, it is believed that Malcolm X led the surge in membership growth. From 1952 till his fallout with the nation in the 1960s, membership went up from 1,200 to 100,000. At 6'4", 180 pounds, red hair plus charm and command, Malcolm led thousands of people to the teachings of the Nation of Islam. His powerful speeches and message of self-reliance made him the second most powerful man in the NOI behind Elijah Muhammad. At one point, it is estimated that Malcolm-led temples were pulling in close to 200 converts every month. His most famous recruit was a young black boxer from Louisville, Kentucky by the name of Cassius Clay. After joining the NOI, the world began to call him Muhammad Ali. 6. He had a creative side. All great men have a hobby where they showcase their creativity. Some try out board games like chess, others try ballroom dancing, painting, or guitar lessons. But do you know what Malcolm enjoyed? Photography. If you look through the photos taken of the great civil rights leader, you'll often see images of him holding a camera. Malcolm was known to carry film cameras with photo and video. Malcolm wanted to capture proof that Muslims and members of the NOI were productive, kind, and balanced, which went against the sensationalized narrative, which portrayed them as a black supremacist terrorist organization. Malcolm's photos often showcased children going to school, members working in the community, and their thriving businesses. He also enjoyed catching images of his family and some of his contemporaries like Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, and Jim Brown. After his wife, Betty Shabazz's death, Malcolm X's photo library was acquired by the New York Library. 5. Molding minds for generations. Malcolm X was one of the greatest orators and thought leaders of modern times. However, as we already examined, the self-educated leader dropped out of high school at the age of 14. But even still, several schools are named after him, including a college. Malcolm X College is a 2-year college on the north side of Chicago, Illinois. Founded as Crane College in 1911, it started as a community college designed for the graduates of the local high school. Then in 1968, at the behest of the local community, Crane College was renamed Malcolm X College. Malcolm X College focuses on preparing its students for careers in the healthcare field. The school received a $250 million upgrade in 2016 when the city of Chicago built a state-of-the-art facility and a 1,500-space parking garage. And there are other schools throughout the country that carry on honoring Minister Malcolm, including Malcolm X Academy in San Francisco, Malcolm Shabazz City High School in Madison, Wisconsin, and Malcolm X Elementary School in Washington, D.C. 4. A man of many names. A lot of famed black Americans have gone through name changes. Martin Luther King was born Michael King. Muhammad Ali was born Cassius Clay. And Prince turned his name into a symbol. You may have known Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little, but did you know he changed his name again? As an adolescent and street hustler, Malcolm Little also went by the monikers Detroit Red and Red because of his red hair. And when he was sentenced to prison, he rejected the teachings of the Bible so much that he earned the nickname Satan. After being inspired by his siblings to follow the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, he then dropped Little from his name and began going by Malcolm X. In 1964, after Malcolm left the Nation of Islam, he took a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. Here, he experienced his second conversion into the Islamic faith and embraced Sunni Islam, adopting the name El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. He would carry that name until his death in 1965. 3. MLK versus Malcolm. Ali versus Frazier. Jordan versus Magic. Prince versus Michael. Some of the greatest rivalries came through head-to-head competition. Others were challenged through fan debates. Rivals, especially ones of different styles, often create the most fervent followers. The debate of Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of nonviolence, or Malcolm X's by any means necessary, impassioned many. But did you know they only met once? The chance meeting took place on March 25, 1964, in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The men were both in attendance, watching a Senate hearing regarding legislation aimed at ending segregation in public places and racial discrimination in employment. The bill had been proposed by President John F. Kennedy following intense lobbying by King and others, and was being shepherded through Congress by President Lyndon Johnson. After King finished a press conference, the former member of the Nation of Islam approached Dr. King. The interaction lasted mere minutes. Unfortunately, that would be the only time these brilliant leaders met, as Malcolm X was assassinated a year later. Malcolm X and Dr. King were a dividing line for a lot of African Americans, supporters, and critics. Dr. King, with his philosophies of nonviolence, creating changes through legislation and push for integration, versus Malcolm's fiery rhetoric, calling for African Americans to defend themselves against white violence and black separatism instead of integration. A lot of the divisiveness was infused by the FBI and CIA, whose main goals were to dismantle both parties in their efforts to put a halt to the civil rights movement. Much of this was able to persist for some time because the two giants only met once. There are only 2 facts left. If you can guess at least one, leave a fist emoji in the comments. 2. Was a foster child. Malcolm's childhood was filled with potholes. Not only was he and his family uprooted by the threat of white violence several times, but his father was allegedly murdered by a white supremacist group. This led Malcolm's mother to become a widow and his siblings to be fatherless. But after a mental breakdown, Louise Little was committed to a psychiatric hospital, which means her children would become orphans. After losing her husband, Earl, in 1931, Louise Little struggled to make ends meet. The life insurance policy on her late husband was deemed null and void after officials considered Earl's death a suicide. Over the next several years, Louise sold food from her garden as her children hunted game. In 1937, after becoming pregnant by who she believed would be her next husband, the potential suitor abandoned her and their unborn child. Then, in 1938, Louise had a nervous breakdown and was committed to the Kalamazoo State Hospital. And since Malcolm and his siblings didn't have any other family, the children were separated and sent to foster homes. Malcolm eventually moved to Boston with his big sister when he turned 14. They also secured their mother's release 24 years later. 1. Famous portrayals. The 1992 film Malcolm X was directed by Spike Lee and featured Academy Award-winning actor Denzel Washington. The film focused on the life of Malcolm based on his autobiography released in 1965. This is the most notable portrayal of Malcolm, but did you know he was also played by Morgan Freeman? Morgan Freeman starred in the 1981 film Death of a Prophet. The film is a documentary-style depiction of Malcolm's last 24 hours before his assassination. It had a lukewarm response, but it is often credited for Morgan's great performance. Another fun fact, the guy who played the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the 1992 film Malcolm X also played Malcolm X in the 1979 miniseries Roots: The Next Generation. The polarizing civil rights leader has been added to many storylines of plays, TV shows, and movies, including The Godfather of Harlem, X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, and The Greatest. Very few names resonate with the world like Martin Luther King Jr. His practice of nonviolence resistance has been studied and revered for decades. But did you know that Martin was not his birth name? Here are 15 things you didn't know about the great Dr. Martin Luther King. 15. He paid for Julia Roberts' birth. Julia Roberts, an award-winning actress for her roles in Hook, Ocean's 11, and Erin Brockovich. But her career may not have happened if it wasn't for Dr. King. Dr. King and his wife, the incredible Coretta Scott King, wanted to put their young children into acting classes. However, in the Jim Crow South, the options were limited. However, there was one school. The Kings found the only integrated theater school in Atlanta, the Actors and Writers Workshop. The school's owners were Walter and Betty Roberts. At their school, white and black children worked together and learned together. Because of the generosity of the Roberts, they befriended the Kings. During that time, Betty Roberts gave birth to a baby girl, Julia. But because of limited financial resources, the Roberts struggled to afford the subsequent hospital bills. But just like the Roberts extended their resources and kindness, the Kings returned the favor and paid the hospital bill. We think Dr. King and Mrs. King should get credits in every Julia Roberts movie. 14. A generational pastor. What do Martin Luther King Jr. and award-winning actress Angelica Houston have in common? No, he didn't pay for her birth. They both are third generations of their family's profession. Just like his father and grandfather, Dr. King went on to become a pastor. Dr. King was a fierce advocate of nonviolent disruption, and his courage came from his deep-rooted faith in Christianity. As a child, he got to see his grandfather, Adam Williams, and father, Martin Luther King Sr., lead the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Growing up, Martin Jr. grappled with the idea of Christianity, often questioning whether the religion was right for him. However, he still attended faithfully and sang in the choir. In college, he continued to study theology and worked as an assistant minister. Then, at the age of only 25, he was called to be a pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Mobile, Alabama. From the pulpit is where Dr. King started to gain fame as a powerful orator, as the Dexter Church was a very influential church in the Black community of Mobile. 13. He was into fashion. When you talk about Dr. King, it's usually in the realm of fighting for equality and going up against white supremacy. It's sometimes easy to forget he was a regular guy, and he wasn't immune to looking in the mirror every day. Dr. King loved dressing nice. No matter if it's him at the front of the pulpit, leading hundreds of protesters, or casually kicking it around the neighborhood, you'd never catch his choice of clothing lacking. His knack for looking sharp started young. While in school, he was known for keeping his patent leather shoes polished and rocking tweed shoes. So much so, his nickname was Tweety. His smooth style made him a favorite among all of his classmates. As he got older, his staple choice was a three-piece suit, white formal dress shirt, French cuffs, and black Oxfords. But it was his laid-back choices that surprised those looking through the archives. Straw hats, Hawaiian shirts, Ray-Ban glasses, suede double-breasted jackets, and a Rolex were all pieces from Closet de King. 12. A child genius. As impressive as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the man was, him as a child was equally impressive. Before he was leading thousands on the streets, he was a leader in his classroom. Dr. King showed his genius early when he skipped 9th grade. He then furthered his legend when he graduated high school at only 15 years old. But as many children, young Martin at times showed disdain for school. Young Martin would often get into fights, and he hated grammar and spelling. But he persisted. Dr. King garnered his vast vocabulary from reading the entire dictionary and would often get out of altercations by using his words. As a child, he also excelled as a member of the junior choir and took violin and piano lessons. 11. Almost 1,000 streets are named after him. There was a time where Black and white people couldn't even share the same sidewalk, so this next fact about Dr. King is actually insane. As of 2023, there are 955 streets named after Martin Luther King Jr. In just about every major city, you can find an MLK Boulevard, street, avenue, ways, lanes, and courts. In Georgia alone, there are over 125 streets bearing the civil rights activist's name. Of course, this is far from what Dr. King or any other person during his time could have imagined. Not only are roadways bearing his name, but schools scattered throughout the country also feature his name. Over 114 public schools in America carry in the legacy of Dr. King. In a country that separated everything from schools, restaurants, to water fountains by race, to now have places of community and education be labeled with the name of a Black man is the progress Dr. King dreamed of. 10. He survived an assassination attempt. Tragically, Dr. King's life was taken away before his 40th birthday, while standing on the balcony of a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. However, that wasn't the first attempt on his life. September 20th, 1958, Dr. King was at the Blumstein's department store in Harlem, New York. At the time, he was on tour promoting his book, Stride Toward Freedom. In the midst of signing books, a 42-year-old Black woman named Izola Curry approached Dr. King. "Are you Martin Luther King?" Izola asked, and as Dr. King confirmed his identity, in an act of insanity, Izola reached in her purse and retrieved a letter opener and put it through Dr. King's chest at the edge of his heart. Ms. Curry was immediately apprehended. Dr. King immediately rushed to the hospital. The sharp blade was inches away from one of his aorta. Doctors told him he was so close to death that a sneeze would have caused the blade to puncture his aorta, which would have resulted in him suffocating in his own blood. As for Izola Curry, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found to have been suffering from extreme bouts of delusions and paranoia. She was found unfit for trial and sentenced to several years in a psychiatric ward. 9. Father of 4 children. Martin Luther King Jr. was a lot of things to a lot of people, but nothing came before his wife and children. On June 18, 1953, Martin married Coretta Scott. They went on to have 4 children: Yolanda, Martin III, Dexter, and Bernice. Dr. King's devotion to the fight for equality kept him on the road and away from his family for weeks at a time, and many months throughout the year, but they never left his mind. When Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he highlighted how his vision for the future centered around them. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Dr. King knew he was important to thousands, but he knew who was the real backbone of his strength, and that was his wife, Coretta Scott King. To have a wife like Coretta, who was strong enough to take on 4 children, and the constant threat of danger pointed at her husband, was something Dr. King deemed invaluable. 8. The youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. Martin Luther King Jr. died at 39 years old. One of the most fascinating parts of the life and legacy of Dr. King is that he accomplished so many great things in such a short life. In 1964, Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in the nonviolent struggle for the civil rights of African Americans. At the time, he was not only the 12th American to win, but at 35, he was also the youngest. Another fact about his victory: Dr. King found out he won the prestigious award in the hospital. Earlier that day, Dr. King had checked himself into the hospital because of exhaustion. Dr. King was not the first African American to win the award. That title belongs to one of the greatest American Renaissance men, Ralph Bunche. In total, only 3 African Americans have won the Nobel Peace Prize: Ralph Bunche, Dr. King, and the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama. 7. Protested for 13 months. Historically, American demonstrations and protests have proven to be chaotic and destructive in order to bring about change. However, a lot of these fiery protests burn hot, but not long. So that's why this next feat by Dr. King was so remarkable. On December 1st, 1955, a young Black woman named Rosa Parks was arrested for her refusal to obey a Jim Crow segregation law that prohibits Black people from sitting in the front of public buses. Her resistance and subsequent arrest triggered the Montgomery bus boycott. A 26-year-old newly ordained pastor from Atlanta was chosen to guide the protest, none other than Martin Luther King Jr. At the helm, MLK led acts of civil disobedience, grassroots organization, and nonviolent protests. These acts of peaceful resistance lasted for 385 days. Their discipline, dedication, and patience paid off in the end. The results? A Supreme Court decision ordering buses to integrate. 6. Arrested over 25 times. You might think because Dr. King's protests were nonviolent and peaceful that he wouldn't be considered a troublemaker, but his arrest record says otherwise. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested at least 30 times. Even though his tactics were peaceful in performance, they were annoying to those who opposed them. His leading demonstrations of civil disobedience, like sit-ins, landed him in prison for trespassing. His other crimes include marching without a permit, disturbing the peace, and breaking various protest laws. Even as America continuously tried to dim his light, he constantly rose above it. After being arrested again on April 16, 1963, from a prison cell in Birmingham, Alabama, Dr. King penned his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail. Dr. King wrote the letter as a response to 8 white clergymen who agreed that social injustices along racial lines existed, but called for an end to the acts of civil disobediences. In the open letter, he wrote that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and to take direct action, rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. In the letter, he continues, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are halfway through our list. Hit that subscribe button if you're still there. These next few facts are sure to surprise many. 5. Met Malcolm X only once. Whether it's LeBron versus Jordan, Michael and Prince, or Pacino and De Niro, we are often divided on who is the best. That was also the case when it came to the civil rights movement and the correct way forward for African Americans. And the topics of the debate? The combating philosophies of MLK versus those of Malcolm X. Malcolm X and Dr. King were a dividing line for a lot of African Americans, supporters, and critics. Dr. King, with his philosophies of nonviolence, creating changes through legislation, and push for integration, versus Malcolm's fiery rhetoric, calling for African Americans to defend themselves against white violence and black separatism instead of integration. A lot of the divisiveness was infused by the FBI and CIA, whose main goals were to dismantle both parties in their efforts to put a halt to the civil rights movement. Much of this was able to persist for some time because the two giants only met once. The chance meeting took place on March 25, 1964, in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The men were both in attendance, watching a Senate hearing regarding legislation aimed at ending segregation in public places and racial discrimination in employment. The bill had been proposed by President John F. Kennedy following intense lobbying by King and others, and was being shepherded through Congress by President Lyndon Johnson. After Dr. King finished a press conference, the former member of the Nation of Islam approached Dr. King. The interaction lasted mere minutes. Unfortunately, that would be the only time these brilliant leaders met, as Malcolm X was assassinated a year later. 4. His whole neighborhood is preserved. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s entire childhood neighborhood is preserved? Dr. King was raised in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. Sweet Auburn was a predominantly black neighborhood and considered a hub of black commerce and culture. The Kings lived in a two-story frame Queen Anne-style house that was purchased in 1909 by Dr. King's grandfather, Reverend Adam Daniel Williams. After Reverend Williams' death, the house was passed down to his daughter and her husband, Dr. King's parents. They lived in the home until Dr. King was 12 years old. The Sweet Auburn neighborhood consisted of black doctors, black lawyers, teachers, and working-class folk. Most of the original homes, including the historic shotgun homes, have been preserved. Some are even occupied by new residents. Now, the entire neighborhood is part of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park, a sprawling 35-acre exhibit that lets you tour the roots of the civil rights advocate. The national park also includes a museum, an educational center, and the Ebenezer Baptist Church. 3. He's buried at a museum. The world mourned on April 4, 1968. That is the day Dr. King was assassinated while standing on the balcony of Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. But do you know where he is buried? A public ceremony was held the very next day in Memphis, where an estimated 200,000 watched as his funeral procession passed through the streets. His body was then flown home to Atlanta, where hundreds of thousands mourned. A public viewing was held at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and he was eventually laid to rest in Southview Cemetery next to his parents. However, 2 years later, his body was moved to what is now the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park. The marble tomb sits in the middle of the reflecting pool that highlights the outer area of the museum aspect of the national park. The burial site initially only had space for Dr. King, but in 2006, shortly after her death, his wife, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, was placed next to him. Two of the most iconic and powerful people in the civil rights movement now rest together in eternal grace. 2. His birth name is Michael. Some of the greatest forces in modern times have been named Michael. Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, and Michael King Jr. Yep, Dr. King's birth name wasn't Martin, but Michael. He was named after his father, Michael King Sr. In 1934, the Ebenezer Baptist Church sent Michael Sr. on a multinational trip that included a stop in Berlin, Germany. While there, he visited sites in Germany that were associated with the Reformation leader Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a German priest during the 1500s. He taught that salvation and, consequently, eternal life were not earned by good deeds. Rather, they are received only as a free gift of God's grace through the believer's faith in Jesus Christ, who is the sole redeemer from sin. King Sr. was so moved by the works associated with the German priest that upon his return home, he changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr. and his 5-year-old son's name to Martin Luther King Jr. Even though born a century apart, both the Reformation leader and civil rights leader shared more in common than just a name. They both were frustrated with the hypocrisy of the power structures that guided their country. Luther with the church, King with the system of racial segregation. They both were great writers and communicators, and they both created movements that outlived them both. Do you know any other crazy facts about Dr. King? Comment below. 1. I Have a Dream was improvised. Move over, Jay-Z. One of the greatest on a mic also could make it happen without a pen. Did you know that Dr. King's famed I Have a Dream speech was a freestyle? On August 28, 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered for this historic march on Washington. The march was a result of the growing frustration with racial segregation and continued systemic oppression. The gathering of over 260,000 was a resounding demand for justice for African Americans. The last speaker at the event was Dr. Martin Luther King. Broadcasted on live television, Dr. King began his closing arguments by invoking the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the U.S. Constitution. But then he spoke from his soul. "I have a dream." His voice trembled, and his words sent the thunder through the crowd. Dr. King spoke of a nation that would judge each other by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. That the sons of former slaves and former slave owners would sit down in brotherhood. In his dream, the heat of oppression would transform into an oasis of justice and freedom. Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech is ranked as the greatest speech of the 20th century. His words took root and helped lead to the Civil Rights Act the following year. Dr. King's work that day, and all of his others, continue to impact us to this day. May his dream continue to inspire us all.
Do you believe Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were truly enemies? Were their philosophies irreconcilable? Or were they in fact two sides of the same coin fighting for the same goal, racial equality, just with different weapons? Join us on this journey as we delve into the complex relationship between these two iconic figures. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were the giants of the Civil Rights Movement, yet their names are often uttered in hushed whispers, separated by an invisible line in history. America in the 1950s and 60s was a tinderbox of racial tension. Segregation and discrimination were the law of the land, casting a long shadow over the lives of millions of African Americans. It was in this cauldron of injustice that two voices rose above the din, each offering a different path toward freedom. Martin Luther King Jr., the apostle of nonviolent resistance, with a soaring dream of racial harmony, and Malcolm X, the fiery revolutionary, preached self-defense and black self-reliance. Let's explore their contrasting philosophies, the role of the media in creating a false dichotomy, and the enduring impact of their legacies on the struggle for racial justice today. The Civil Rights Movement, 1950s through the 1960s. To fully understand the relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., we must first step back and go through the canvas of America in the 1950s and 60s. It was a nation grappling with the deep scars of slavery and the lingering injustices that festered in its wake. Imagine a world where black and white weren't just colors, but dividing lines etched into every aspect of life. Segregation ruled with an iron fist, dictating where you could live, learn, eat, even drink. Public buses, schools, restaurants, and even water fountains were segregated, forcing African Americans into a shadow society and denying them the basic dignities and rights afforded to their white counterparts. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a denial of humanity. Black families were trapped in cycles of poverty, denied access to quality education and employment, and subjected to the constant threat of violence and intimidation. Jim Crow laws were the teeth of this oppressive system, while the brutal realities of lynchings and police brutality was its ugly claw. The Civil Rights Movement, like a tidal wave of human dignity, began to gather momentum. From the Montgomery bus boycott, led by Rosa Parks and Dr. King, to the sit-ins at lunch counters and the freedom rides challenging interstate segregation, the movement refused to be silenced. It was a chorus of voices, demanding equality, justice, and an end to the suffocating grip of Jim Crow. This was the stage upon which Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. emerged. Two towering figures, each with a unique vision for achieving the same dream, a dream of a truly free and equal America for all its citizens. But the paths they would choose, the tools they would use, and the shadows that the media would cast upon their relationship would become a story in itself. Different paths, but the same goal. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. represented two distinct but equally valid approaches to the same goal. Malcolm X championed self-defense and black reliance, while Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for nonviolent resistance and integration. Their voices, forever etched in history, continue to inspire and challenge us, reminding us that the fight for justice and equality is an ongoing journey, paved with both fiery defiance and an unwavering hope. Malcolm X. Malcolm X's life was a testament to the harsh realities of segregation and its brutal effects. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925, he witnessed firsthand the racism that poisoned American society. Tragedy struck with the death of his father, leaving the family to grapple with poverty and discrimination. Malcolm's early experiences, fraught with adversity, would shape a worldview steeped in resilience, self-reliance, and an unyielding quest for justice. Malcolm's journey took a profound turn during his incarceration when he discovered the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Embracing Islam, he shed his surname Little, symbolizing the rejection of his family's legacy of enslavement. Expelled from school at 15, he faced poverty, discrimination, and even prison, where he encountered the Nation of Islam, also known as NOI. The NOI's message of black self-determination and self-defense resonated deeply with Malcolm, offering an alternative to the oppressive status quo. His association with the Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, catapulted him into a prominent role. His articulate speeches and commitment to the tenets of the Nation of Islam made him a rising star within the movement. Malcolm X became a powerful voice for the NOI, preaching black pride and self-reliance. He advocated for self-defense against white aggression, famously stating, "We have no program for integration, assimilation, or separation. We have a program of self-determination." His message of Pan-Africanism, promoting unity among black people worldwide, resonated with many disillusioned by the slow pace of change in America. Malcolm X's advocacy extended beyond religious principles, embracing the Nation of Islam's philosophy of black separatism. He championed economic self-sufficiency and community empowerment. Malcolm X's fiery speeches challenged America's conscience, demanding freedom and equality, not through pleas for integration, but through any means necessary. In the face of escalating racial violence, Malcolm took a controversial stance on self-defense, arguing that African Americans had the right to protect themselves from systematic oppression. His powerful address at the 1964 Organization of Afro-American Unity Summit in Cairo, OAU, advocating for armed self-defense and Pan-African solidarity, stands as a testament to his unwavering commitment to black liberation. As Malcolm X rose to prominence, the media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Initial portrayals often focused on his fiery rhetoric and confrontational style, painting him as a radical figure challenging the status quo. Martin Luther King Jr. Born on January 15, 1929, in the heart of the American South, Atlanta, Georgia, Martin Luther King Jr. emerged from a lineage deeply entrenched in the African American church tradition. Raised in a segregated society, young Martin experienced the harsh realities of racial discrimination from an early age. His parents instilled in him the values of resilience and determination, fostering a sense of purpose that would later shape his destiny. King's educational journey in racial segregated schools exposed him to the stark inequalities of the Jim Crow South, fueling his desire for change. His formative years laid the groundwork for a future leader who would champion civil rights with unparalleled conviction. The spark that ignited King's leadership came during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. His involvement in the protest against racial segregation on public transportation catapulted him into the forefront of the civil rights movement. In the aftermath of his pivotal event, King played a key role in founding the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957. At the helm of the SCLC, King led the charge for civil rights through nonviolent means, drawing inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. His charisma and eloquence made him a powerful force for change, capturing the hearts and minds of a nation yearning for justice. Dr. King's commitment to nonviolent resistance became the cornerstone of his activism. Infused with Christian teachings of love and forgiveness, he orchestrated a series of peaceful protests, marches, and acts of civil disobedience to challenge racial injustice. His strategy aimed not only at legislative change, but also at transforming the hearts and minds of the American people. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, delivered at the March on Washington in 1963, remains a beacon of hope and a defining moment in the civil rights movement. He spoke of a beloved community where race wouldn't divide, where justice would prevail, and where little black boys and little white boys would be able to join hands as brothers. His philosophy of nonviolence extended beyond mere tactics, urging love and forgiveness even in the face of hate and brutality. Dr. King's leadership in marches like the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, where he faced tear gas and billy clubs, showcased his unwavering commitment to nonviolent protest. His powerful sermons and speeches like Letter from Birmingham Jail eloquently articulated the moral case for racial equality and challenged the conscience of a nation. As King's prominence grew, so did the media's attention. News outlets depicted him as a symbol of hope, a charismatic leader advocating for a more just society. However, the contrast between King's nonviolent approach and the more assertive stance of figures like Malcolm X led to nuanced portrayals. Media coverage ranged from admiration to criticism, reflecting the complexities of public perception during this tumultuous period. While Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. navigated different paths to achieve racial equality, one constant loomed in the shadows: the watchful eye of the FBI. directed by J. Edgar Hoover. This omnipresent surveillance not only aimed to undermine their movements, but also fueled a climate of fear and mistrust that exacerbated tensions between the two leaders and their supporters. As voices advocating for justice and equality grew louder, the Federal Bureau of Investigation under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover turned its watchful eye toward those at the forefront. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. found themselves under intense FBI scrutiny. Wiretaps, infiltration, and the compilation of extensive dossiers became the tools of surveillance. The government, in its pursuit of control, sought to understand, monitor, and sometimes undermine the leaders who dared to challenge the status quo. The FBI viewed both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. as threats to national security. Malcolm X's affiliation with the Nation of Islam and his calls for self-defense triggered alarms, leading to extensive monitoring of his movements and communications. Likewise, Dr. King's nonviolent protests, despite their peaceful nature, were seen as a potential catalyst for social unrest, prompting the FBI to infiltrate the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and engage in illegal wiretapping. FBI made blatant attempts to disrupt the movement. This surveillance went beyond mere observation. The infamous COINTELPRO, or counterintelligence program, emerged as a sinister weapon in the government's arsenal. Covert actions ranged from spreading false rumors to exacerbating existing tensions between activists. The goal was to create divisions, fuel internal conflicts, and ultimately weaken the collective strength of the civil rights movement. With a mandate to disrupt civil rights organizations, COINTELPRO targeted not only Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but also aimed to sow seeds of discord within the broader movement. The FBI actively sought to discredit both leaders. In Malcolm X's case, they leaked information to the media portraying him as a violent extremist. For Dr. King, the FBI sent him anonymous letters containing fabricated details about his personal life, aiming to sow dissension within the SCLC and damage his reputation. The orchestrated attempts to create rifts within the movement cast a shadow over the relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. The pervasive atmosphere of suspicion created by the FBI's actions played a significant role in amplifying existing tensions. Media often pitted the two against each other, highlighting their contrasting tactics and overlooking their shared goal of racial equality. This constant scrutiny and manufactured discord prevented genuine understanding and collaboration, ultimately weakening the collective force of the civil rights movement. As the 1960s unfolded, both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. underwent profound transformations in their perspectives marked by personal growth, changing circumstances, and an ever-shifting socio-political landscape. Beneath the surface of contrasting tactics and public statements existed a layer of mutual respect and a shared yearning for a better future for Black Americans. Despite their divergent philosophies, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. acknowledged and praised each other's contributions to the civil rights movement. Malcolm X referred to Dr. King as his brother in the fight, expressing admiration for his leadership and charisma. After parting ways with the Nation of Islam in 1964, Malcolm X embarked on a journey of ideological reevaluation. His pilgrimage to Mecca exposed him to a more inclusive Islam and a global perspective that transcended racial divides. Rejecting the separatist stance of his earlier years, Malcolm began advocating for a united front in the fight against racial injustice. His evolving perspective embraced collaboration with other civil rights leaders, signaling a departure from the strict doctrines of the Nation of Islam. In turn, while disagreeing with some of Malcolm X's views, King recognized his power to stir Black consciousness and ignite a spirit of defiance. Martin Luther King Jr.'s activism expanded beyond the boundaries of civil rights. King, a staunch advocate of nonviolence, grew increasingly critical of U.S. policies, notably the Vietnam War. Both leaders recognized that the struggle for civil rights extended beyond legal reforms. It encompassed dismantling systematic economic inequalities. Malcolm and King shared a vision of addressing poverty as an essential component of the broader fight for justice. These pronouncements, often overshadowed by heated rhetoric, illustrate the underlying respect each held for the other's unique contribution to the struggle. Contrary to popular perception, Malcolm X's fiery advocacy and Dr. King's nonviolent resistance weren't contradictory, but rather complementary forces pushing towards the same goal. Malcolm X's strong stance on self-defense resonated with those disillusioned with the slow pace of progress, while Dr. King's unwavering commitment to nonviolence garnered international support and exposed the brutality of segregation to the world. Each approach, catering to different segments of the Black community and generating pressure from different angles, served to advance the cause of racial equality, albeit in distinct ways. Both participated in the March on Washington in 1963, a monumental demonstration of unity against segregation. Additionally, Malcolm X expressed support for Dr. King's Voting Rights Act campaign, recognizing its potential to empower Black communities. These moments of shared purpose, though overshadowed by public disagreements, serve as reminders that their paths, while divergent, occasionally intersected in the fight for a common cause. While Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. navigated their paths toward racial equality, a sinister element slithered in the background: white supremacy. Fueled by hatred and fear, these organizations and individuals exploited the perceived divisions between the leaders, utilizing violence and manipulation to weaken the civil rights movement from within. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the John Birch Society saw the contrasting philosophies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. as an opportunity to sow discord. They amplified the media's portrayal of Malcolm X as a violent extremist, hoping to alienate moderate white allies and discredit the entire movement. Moreover, they portrayed Dr. King as a controllable moderate, hoping to lull the black community into a false sense of progress while maintaining the white power structure. White supremacist groups weren't content with mere manipulation. They employed brutal tactics to silence black leaders and intimidate their followers. Church bombings, targeted assassinations, and threats of violence were commonplace, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that hampered organizing efforts and stifled dissent. The brutal murders of Medgar Evers, Viola Liuzzo, and countless others stand as stark reminders of the lengths white supremacists were willing to go to maintain their grip on power. By portraying Malcolm X as a dangerous radical and Dr. King as a safe moderate, white supremacists benefited twofold. Malcolm X's fiery rhetoric, though powerful, could be easily dismissed as dangerous extremism, isolating him from mainstream support and weakening his influence. Meanwhile, Dr. King's nonviolent approach, while garnering international acclaim, could be contained and co-opted within the existing power structure, allowing white supremacists to maintain control over the pace and direction of change. The lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. reached untimely and tragic ends, leaving an indelible mark on the pages of history. The promise of a brighter future was shattered on February 21, 1965, when Malcolm X was assassinated in New York City. His untimely death sent shockwaves through the civil rights movement, leaving a void that could never be filled. Just 3 years later, on April 4, 1968, the world mourned the loss of Martin Luther King Jr. as he fell victim to an assassin's bullet in Memphis, Tennessee. The dreamer who envisioned equality and justice for all was silenced. Malcolm X's death cast a sad light on the complexities of his journey, prompting a reevaluation of his legacy. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, occurring against a backdrop of civil unrest and a struggle for justice, added layers of poignancy to his already profound impact. The assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. not only robbed the world of two influential leaders, but also profoundly impacted public perception and historical narratives. The assassinations of Malcolm X and Dr. King cast a long shadow of grief and doubt over the civil rights movement. While new leaders emerged to carry the torch, the movement undeniably changed course, grappling with internal divisions and searching for a new path forward. The brutal slayings of Malcolm X in 1965 and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 sent shockwaves through the civil rights movement and the nation as a whole. In the wake of these tragedies, the nonviolent resistance championed by Dr. King faced growing skepticism. Many within the black community, disillusioned by the slow pace of progress and shaken by the brutal reality of violence, embraced Malcolm X's call for self-defense and black self-reliance. This shift in sentiment led to the rise of black power movements, advocating for armed self-defense and community empowerment. These weren't mere losses of iconic figures. They were brutal reminders of the deep-seated racial hatred that still festered within American society. The impact of their death resonates even today, shaping the trajectory of the movement and influencing the ongoing fight for racial justice. Their legacies don't exist in isolation. They continue to shape the conversation about race, justice, and social change. Leaders like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, James Baldwin, and countless others, each with their unique experiences and philosophies, played crucial roles in shaping the movement's direction and impact. Ignoring their contributions is like viewing a masterpiece through a pinhole, missing the richness and depth of the entire work. From Black Lives Matter protests to debates over police reform, the voices of Malcolm X and Dr. King resonate through the decades, offering valuable perspectives and reminding us of the unfinished work of the civil rights movement. As we conclude on lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., it is crucial to reflect on the intricate dynamics that shaped their journey through the tumultuous waters of the civil rights movement. According to historian Robin D. G. Kelly, while often portrayed as rivals, Malcolm X and King were more allies on different battlefields. cause. King's nonviolence shone a light on racial injustice on the global stage, while Malcolm's bold advocacy for black self-reliance empowered those yearning for immediate action. Both were vital forces, pushing the movement forward from different angles. Malcolm X's exposure to racism and incarceration fueled his belief in self-defense and black unity. King, influenced by Christian teachings and the Montgomery bus boycott, embraced nonviolence as a way to expose the moral bankruptcy of segregation. Though different paths, their shared goal was dismantling the machinery of racial oppression. The relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was not a simplistic tale of adversaries. It was a nuanced narrative, marked by occasional convergence, yet defined by the diversity of their approaches to the fight for civil rights. As we conclude this journey, let us not only remember the legacies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., it surely indicates a profound reflection on the societal forces that shaped and distorted their narratives. By understanding the intricacies of the past, we gain a clearer vision of the path forward, a path where the legacies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. can continue to guide us toward a more just and equitable world.